Music serves as a universal language that connects people on a profound, intangible level. But how do musicians do this? I'm Warren Buchholz, Jazz Brand Manager at WUSF, and I'm on a mission to find out. Meet Steve Hunter. He's a musician, composer, and guitarist who's been touring and recording with musicians like Peter Gabriel, Dr. John, Jack Bruce, Lou Reed, Tracy Chapman, Mitch Ryder, Jason Becker, and Alice Cooper, plus many more. Steve has contributed to 10 Alice Cooper records, starting in 1973 with Billion Dollar Babies, and was recently featured heavily on the new Welcome to My Nightmare, number 2. He's also had an illustrious solo career with 7 solo albums, plus more in the making. We met over Zoom. Next to Steve is his wife, Karen Ann, who is also a singer and songwriter. She toured as a backing singer with bands like Gary Newman back in the 80s, and today she's Steve's manager, collaborator, and his eyes. Also on this recording, you'll hear another voice. His name is Emery Columna, who has since passed, but he and I interviewed Steve back in 2015. It was 10 years ago. I don't even want to think about that. There were some great points made in this conversation, and I felt like they should be heard here. So please enjoy our conversation with Steve Hunter.
What inspired you to get into this life of music?
Actually, a couple things, really. I think when I think back on it, we were kind of poor when we first started out. You know, Dad had just got a job and had me, and he had to support me and stuff. So we didn't have a whole lot of stuff in the house. In fact, the house wasn't even complete yet. So about the only entertainment we had is Dad would grab he had an old beat up guitar and he would play songs and kind of sang stuff that he knew. And I think I was about 3. And I liked the sound of it, the sound of music. I didn't, I didn't discern that it was a guitar or any of that stuff, but just I liked the sound of music. We finally got one of these giant Zenith consoles that you could play 78s on and had an FM radio. And so we didn't have a television yet. So we used to listen to a lot of music. When I was a kid, I'd lay in front of the speaker and just get into it. Gotcha. And my grandparents had I found out later it was a harmonium, but we just knew it as a pump organ. And Dad would sit down and pump the organ while I played notes, because I couldn't reach pedals, and then I probably wasn't strong enough to do it anyway. And I would work out school songs that we sang in kindergarten on the keyboard. I would figure them out. And so it just all grew from that, and it just kept growing. It became such a part of my life. It was just, I never even thought about it anymore. It's there, and that's part of me, Mm-hmm. That's when I finally ended up getting into the lap steel. The teacher I had, his name was Heinz Johns, had the most beautiful lap steel technique. He could just make it sing, and all that stuff just hit me in my soul when I heard stuff like that.
You heard Santo and Johnny Sleepwalk for the first time, and that's kind of what got you into playing the lap steel, was it? Yeah.
The thing is, I was already playing lap steel, and I was just starting to try to understand what exactly was its role. And then Santo and Johnny came out with Sleepwalk, and it was a huge hit. I mean, it was a number 1 hit. And I thought, I was about 10 or so, I think, when it came out, or maybe 11. And I thought, my God, like a guy playing a lap steel has a hit record, and there's no singing on it or anything. I was blown away by that.
I think you did a cover of Sleepwalk. Yeah. It sounded like a love letter to Santo and Johnny with the way you played it.
Thank you, because it was like they were so inspiring to me. And then I also heard this lap steel player named Jerry Bird.
Okay.
Now, Jerry Bird, most people never heard of him. But back in the day, say in the 50s, when there were people like, some of the early country players, like Hank Snow and guys like that. The pedal steel had been invented, but they liked the sound of lap steel. So Jerry Bird was hired a lot in Nashville to play lap steel on country songs, and he sort of made it sound a bit like a pedal steel before the pedal steel was invented. But all these influences around in those days for me were very powerful.
Mm. Really just sounds like it propelled you into this illustrious career of music that you've had. And I'm going to list off some of the folks here that you've played with. Peter Gabriel, Lou Reed, Mitch Ryder, Jack Bruce, Alice Cooper.
You rotate out of the armed services, and how do you get a gig with Mitch Ryder?
Well, I tell you, the first thing that I was never able to be very good at is getting a gig. I for some reason or other, I could never hustle up work. So it was me. It's always been wait for the phone to ring. And one day the phone rang, and a friend of mine from Decatur, John Slaughter, is a great bass player, was playing bass with him. And he and I had kicked around Decatur together and been in and out of bands together. And so we knew each other pretty well. And he called me up and he said, "Hey, Steve, man, Detroit is auditioning guitar players, and you ought to come up and give it a shot." So I threw my guitar in the back seat and drove the 8 hours or whatever it was, 6 to 8 hours, I don't remember now, to Detroit and auditioned. When I walked into the rehearsal, there was a Marshall half stack, which I'd never seen in person. I'd only seen photographs, like Jimi Hendrix with like big full stacks and stuff. And I was blown away. There was a real one right in front of me. And when I plugged in and turned it on, it was heavenly.
The showering of power chords out of a Marshall was unlike, say, a Fender.
Oh, yeah. And there's a certain singingness, if that's a word, to playing solos through a Marshall. So it's not just the raw power of the power chords. There's a certain kind of singy sound that comes out when you play solos. It was like the perfect amp for a guitar player to plug into at that time.
So when you got the gig with Mitch, did you get the Marshalls?
I didn't get to keep the one, but I didn't care. I got to use it all. So I didn't care if I didn't have to lug it around, but got it just on stage. Those things are just the most wonderful things to hear,
How do you hook up with Lou Reed?
That's through Bob Ezrin. Bob Ezrin produced, when I was in Detroit, he produced the album. Mitch and I think Johnny Bedanzik, the drummer, had been signed to Paramount Records. I ended up signing along with them to do an album. And Bob Ezrin is the guy they got to produce it. Well, as it turns out, I did this arrangement of a Lou Reed song called Rock and Roll. Leslie West, I finally got to meet him many, many years later, like 35 years later, 40 years later. And he said, I heard that song, that rock and roll song. And he said, you know how many times people came up to me and told me they really liked our new single, Rock and Roll? And I said, wow, that means I got really close to Mountain. But I must have done a better job than I thought I did. But anyway, Lou heard that. He heard that version. And he was knocked out. He loved it. So he tracked Bob down, and then he told Bob he wanted me to play on his next album, which was Berlin, the Berlin album, which was the second album I ever did. So that's how it all really happens in the music business, all this connected stuff, or at least with me. It was all interconnected. Around 1980, the phone calls stopped.
Oh, okay.
I didn't know, because I didn't have to do it for 10 years before that. I didn't know how to go out and get work.
Okay.
I really had not a clue. So I ended up getting myself in a really precarious position there for about 10 years. It was really difficult.
What was something you learned throughout the 80s trying to get new gigs? What was the one thing that kind of resonated with you?
I don't know if I really learned anything. That's the sad thing. I was trying to understand. I sort of thought that I'm going to have to reinvent myself. And then I thought, well, no, if I reinvent myself, then the people who know me aren't going to recognize me. And in fact, a session like that came up. There was one time when I got hired to do an overdub. I came into the studio and I was really having a rough time. So I thought, oh, this is great. Maybe I'll get some more work out of this, you know? So I go in there and I'm all kind of ready to work. And the producer, I can't remember his name. He said, yeah, Steve, we're really excited to have you on this track. Because really love your work with Alice and Peter Gabriel and Lou and everything. I thought, oh, that's great. Wonderful. That was music to my ears. I hadn't heard anything like that in a while, you know?
Yeah.
So I get all set up and I play, and I said, okay, you know, I just kind of ran through the song until I understood the chord changes and stuff. And I played a couple of solos. I asked him, I said, well, what do you want me to play in the solo? What direction? The guy said, just be yourself. Play what you feel. Okay. All right. I did that. And then he said, well, you know, yeah, it's you and it sounds like you, but you know, I don't know if it sounds current. I tried something else that I thought sounded more 80s, you know. Yeah. And then he says, well, yeah, that sounds a little more current, but it doesn't sound like you. So now, what the hell do I do?
It's funny because musicians spend so many years trying to find their own voice through their music. And now that you found it, you now have to change it because of the new sounds that are coming in the 80s. It must have been kind of I don't want to say a culture shock, but I guess a culture shock for you coming out from the rock and roll of the 60s and 70s into this kind of new wavy, kind of new sound of the 80s.
I mean, it was literally overnight. I don't know how else to put it. I mean, there were guys like Tom Petty and the Pretenders and stuff were all doing stuff in the late 70s. But I never really got fully aware of it till the 80s. 1980 is the year that really messed me up, because all of a sudden now all I'm hearing is Duran Duran and groups like that I had no place. I wouldn't know what to play in there. In their form of music. Now they were presenting. I wouldn't have a clue. So I realized that, okay, there's a whole new generation of guitar players you forgot.
Yeah.
Were there coming up behind what you're doing.
Is this a time when you kind of went into more solo albums, or did that come later down the line?
I did my first solo album in 77, and then I did another one in 87, which was, it's called The Deacon, because I kept thinking, I remember now, I had heard Santo and Johnny have a number one hit single. I had heard Dwayne Eddy have a number one hit single. I'd heard all these guitar players who had hit records. And I thought, well, if they could do it, I can do it. I love guitar. I love guitar melody, you know. So I did think that there's got to be another instrumental hit record out there. Somehow I just got to come up with it. And unfortunately I didn't, but that's what I wanted to do.
Do you feel like there has been some sort of overriding guidance coming from somewhere?
I've always tried to follow my gut. So if my gut said, yeah, you got to do this, man, I did it. If I went against my gut, it always hurt me. So something was leading me along the way. So I just learned, just follow it. Don't fight it, just follow it. Because it seems like to me, whoever's leading this thing has got a lot more together than I do. So I'm just, I'm just going to follow it.
I heard you bumped into John Lennon. Was this in London, or how did that happen?
Well, yeah, it's like a weird story because I remember one time during recording, I went to the bathroom, and I go into the bathroom, and just as I'm going in, John Lennon's coming out. And he kind of looks at me and nods, and yeah, okay. So that was one time. Then about a year later, 8 months later or so, I'm in New York at the record plant. And I go to the bathroom, and guess who's in the bathroom? Is John Lennon.
No.
And so we kind of look at him, and he kind of looks at me like, I think I've seen this guy somewhere before, but I can't play it. So we never said anything. You don't talk much in the bathroom. So we didn't say anything. And then, I don't know, maybe a few months later, 6 months later, 8 months later, again, I was doing Jack Bruce's album. I go to the bathroom, and this is at the record plant in L.A., and there's John in the friggin' bathroom. So this is the third time we've been at each other in the bath. I'm starting to feel creepy now, And he just said, "Hi, man, how you doing?" And I said, "Good. How you doing, John?" Did you like the bathroom in the record plant in New York? So anyway, I ended up. They were recording in. John had written a song with Mick Jagger, and they were recording it in Studio C at the record plant. So I snuck back there to see what was going on. I was curious, so I opened up the control room, and there's John sitting at the console with Roy Cicada, and Mick, by the way, had come by the studio to say hi to Jack because they were old buddies. And so I got to meet Mick, and I was fascinated by the fact that he was such a gentleman. He was a very, very sweet, gentle guy. I guess I expected him to be kind of a punk, kind of arrogant and stuff, but he wasn't. He was very gentlemanly and very nice, and it was a pleasure to meet him. So I went back there, and there they were. It's like Jim Keltner, Bobby Keys, Ringo, Klaus Warman on bass, George Harrison on guitar. I mean, it was ridiculous. It was like a Rolling Stones picture, like you'd see on the cover of Rolling Stones or something.
Right.
And John invited me in, but I really couldn't because I was on Jack Bruce's dime, so
right.
I couldn't really come in. But it was like one of those things where, geez, this is really pretty bizarre. Andy Johns was the engineer. And Andy had done Led Zeppelin albums and Stones albums and stuff. And his brother Glenn had done even more stuff.
Right.
So I'm blown away. As far as I'm concerned, I'd made it.
Hey, I hope you're enjoying this and all the quality content we offer through WUSF. We need your help, though. Like everything in an overcapitalized society, things cost money to operate, like creating all of the awesome videos and podcasts you see here. Now, I could break out the puppies and play to Sarah McLachlan, and you break down and hit donate, but I think we're bigger people here. So, if you're able and willing, please donate your dollars today by visiting wusf.org/donate to get started. Anything helps, and your money goes toward producing all of this content, supporting our community, and a whole lot more. And if enough people do this, maybe these annoying ads will go away. Puppies! Donate today.
She just came out with The Deacon Speaks.
That's an anomaly, because it was going to be an instrumental record.
Oh, okay.
I had already written about, I don't know, maybe 8 songs, and had them in various forms of completion. And I wanted to do an instrumental blues tune. So I figured, well, okay, I'm going to pick my favorite blues composer, who was Willie Dixon. I always loved the stuff he wrote. He always puts these great, quirky kind of blues tunes. So I went on Spotify. The very first thing that popped up was Backdoor Man. So I listened to Backdoor Man, and I thought, oh my God, I got to do this. So I was listening to it over and over again to kind of get the feel of the track and everything. And I started singing along with it and trying to get into the same vibe he was into. And to me, it didn't sound too bad to be singing along, you know? I was trying to do like a bit of a character thing when I sang it. So I asked Karen to come. I said, Karen, come in here and listen to this. So I did it for her. I sang the first verse. And she thought kind of the same thing. I don't think she knew what to say. Oh, wait a minute, you tried to sing? No. I said, look, let me set up a mic and I'll just do the chorus. I'll record the chorus and let's see what it sounds like. So I set up a mic and I did the chorus. I am the backdoor man. And I listened back to it. I thought, oh my God, that sounds really cool. I like that. And Karen came in and said, oh my God, that's great. I think you ought to go with it. So I did. I actually had so much fun singing.
That's cool.
That I thought, well, wait a minute. I think maybe I was singing another one. And that's what happened. It just kept snowballing until I ended up singing 8 songs.
Manhattan Blues Project. I love this album. It is seamless. And like I said before, I think about Bob Ezrin when I hear this song, or when I hear this album.
Yeah.
What did he tell you need to make an album? What did he do?
The last time we had talked was when he called me and told me that Lou was going to do the full Berlin album live. And I was so excited about that. I hadn't heard from Bob in a long time, and that's when he called. When he called for that, I was very excited about that because we always wanted to do that. And we finally we had a choir, we had strings and horns. It was just beautiful, magnificent. I really enjoyed that. And then I didn't hear from him again for a while until about, when was it, 2011? 2010. I heard from him again in regards to a new Alice Cooper album. So we got together and worked on Welcome to My Nightmare, the number 2 one. And then I subsequently did a tour in 2011. Right before I left for the tour, I had been playing around with some songs. I had done an arrangement of What's Going On, and I was kind of noodling around, trying to write some stuff. And a friend of mine, Carrie Page, she's a photographer. She's a fashion photographer in New York. Grabbed her camera one day. It was a beautiful spring day in New York, clear blue sky, and she went out shooting some photographs, and she posted some of them on Facebook, and one of them was this beautiful sunset in Central Park. So I ended up writing this song, which I ironically called Sunset in Central Park. It got me off on this thought. Well, wait a minute. I've always liked New York and Manhattan. I've always loved the place. Every time I've gone there, I didn't want to leave. So I thought, well, why don't I write an album about Manhattan and all my favorite places and all the cool spots that I know of in Manhattan? And that's how the album came about. So all during the time I was on the road with Alice, I was kind of thinking about that album. I've toured my whole life. There was a period in touring that you just seem to get tired and never catch up.
Yeah.
So about the second month of that tour, we were both just to the point where all I wanted to do was sleep. And even if I did sleep all day when I woke up to do a show, I was still tired. The only time I got any real interviews when we did the show.
I see.
Because that's fun and the adrenaline comes, you know.
How did the tour come about?
Kind of a weird story. Bob Ezrin had kind of tried to convince us to move to Nashville because that's where he was. And he was saying, I could probably get you a lot of work if you get out here. We're going to do the Alice Cooper Welcome to by night here. And it'd be nice to have you out here, stuff. So we ended up moving to Nashville from Prescott, Arizona.
Okay.
And so we were there. I wasn't sure I was liking it, but we were there and we were working on the album. And Shep, Alice's manager, asked me if I would like to sit in when Alice played Nashville. She was going to play Nashville. He was already there working on vocals. The other day or two off, and he was working on vocals on the album. This show came on, and Shep just said, "You got a guitar here, right? Why don't you come in and sit in? Why don't you come out and sit in tonight?" So I said, "All right, I'll do that. That'd be fun." And so I grabbed my guitar, agreed. I went down there and I went on stage and played 18, which I had played a gajillion times before. Now, I brought the 70s
You did.
guitar.
As soon as you heard him, he was checking the guitar and started playing, immediately it was like Alice.
Yeah, because I played with him so much, and that's where I came from. Well, that was my roots, the blues rock thing. The thing is, Alice and I had known Alice since '71 when I first met him, and it was before 18 even broke as a single. I knew the band, and we've been friends all through that. Shep said, "Now I can't believe it. You played one note, and inside it was there. It was Alice, and it was '70s." So he said, how about touring? And I said, "Yeah, okay, let's do it." When Bob and Shep and Alice talked about it, it was really like they wanted to go back to the '70s and play some of the old parts again that we found and played in the old days. I mean, those parts, we worked on those parts to get them right, to mix and make the music sound right. And through many years, 30 years, those parts had changed, when different guitar players or musicians interpreted the parts differently, and all that stuff. The first couple of legs of the tour, man, that band was...
With Damon.
Dana Johnson.
Ben Sobel on drums.
Rick Sobel, Chuck Garrick on bass, me and Tom Hendricks. That band, after the first leg of the tour, was so bloody tight, and it sounded so good.
Each performance you gave, did you find variations throughout playing each song, or was it kind of the same repetitious playing for each song? Or did you find little minutia, cool details you may not have found before? Like how did each night go?
Well, each night the format stayed the same. So in other words, the songs we did and the arrangements of the songs all stayed the same. Like especially with Alice, if you've got props and you've got little things happening throughout the show, you got to kind of stay. But there was always room for the solos were never the same, except if they were written solos on an album or something. The audience is expected to hear that. Then you try to reproduce that. And there were things within the rhythm parts and stuff that you could change just a little. You don't want to lose all that tightness. Because it just makes for a better show. I never ever got bored doing the same songs every night. Never, ever. Because as soon as you walk out stage, it's a new night. I would get bored if it was a lot of stuff that you had to sync to, like, a lot of click tracks. So like Jeff was talking about with Gary Newman, drum parts and stuff, that would tend to bore the crap out of you. So, and I like it when sometimes it goes a little bit here and a little bit there, and I'm not expecting it. But one of the best people for that tour was Tracy Chapman. Because she would sometimes do a different song. We'd be on stage in front of 8,000 people in a theater somewhere, And she would walk back to us and say, okay, you guys, you don't know this song, but just follow along. I don't know how many times we did not know the song. And part of that is because she trusted us. I friggin' loved it. Every time we did a Tracy Chapman show, we got a different set list. There was always a couple tunes that had been moved around, or, oh, I'm going to do this tune tonight, not this one. Certain songs she had to do, like Fast Car and New Beginnings and things like that, she had to do. But I really loved the fact that she really liked keeping the show fluid.
How did the Peter Gabriel gig happen? Was that another phone call deal?
Yeah, it was another Bob Ezrin.
Okay.
Because Peter wanted Bob to produce the album.
Uh-huh.
I was already in Toronto. Bob had a studio in Toronto. We were doing a lot of work there. We did the Alice Cooper Welcome to a Nightmare album there. As a matter of fact, I'd even moved up there. I was living there for a little while. And he told me that during the Nightmare album that we were going to probably do the Peter Gabriel solo album. So I just stayed there. And the next album we worked on was Peter Gabriel.
Somebody told me that this the actual track was cut on the last day of the recording session. Everybody was splitting up and going different directions.
Yeah, most of the band, about half the band, was from New York. Robert Fripp was there, of course, from London. And Bob had booked him for a specific amount of time. So we had one day left to do basic tracks. Peter had some trouble with the lyrics on Salisbury Hill. I think Bob and he and Bob both knew the song it was a good song, but he was having some trouble with the lyrics, and he hadn't quite resolved that yet. So we weren't sure it was even going to be recorded. As it turned out, he sorted out the lyrics, and we decided we better get in the studio and record it. Robert Fripp had already left. He was on his way back to London. He had sessions there, so he had already left. And Tony Levin and Alan Schwartzberg and Jimmy Malin, I think even Larry Fast, were all leaving the next day for New York. So we had to do it that night. And we went into Bob's office. I grabbed a guitar, an acoustic guitar, and Peter and Bob and I all went in the office and worked out the guitar approach for Salisbury Hill, which it was Bob's idea to make it sort of a modified Travis picking kind of a deal.
Uh-huh.
Of course, I was petrified because it was in 7/4, and I wasn't the kind of guy that liked to play in odd times. I like to play in good old 4/4, and I'm a happy camper, you know. But the song was so well written that the 7/4 never really felt uncomfortable. So I worked out the part, and we went in and recorded it. I triple tracked it. I did 3 tracks of the same part, and we did what we called VSO the machine, which there was a little knob on the machine. You could vary the speed of it slightly, and when you do that, you get this nice chorusing effect on the guitars. It's a natural organic chorusing. A lot of people thought it was a 12-string, but it was triple tracked.
You live in Spain now.
Yeah.
What cultural differences with music have you found in Spain versus the United States?
Yeah, there is some differences. I mean, there always has been, though, between Europe and America, even in Canada and America. You know, each culture, I guess you and I recall, has their own interpretation. Like, for instance, if you go to Finland and you get on stage and you're going to play blues with Finnish musicians, all you have to do is say blues, and it's a 1-4-5 progression. They know exactly what you mean. But their interpretation is slightly different than what you see in America. But each culture has their, whatever has pushed them in the direction that they're in, that obviously influences their interpretation of blues. So the Spaniard players play a little differently. Swedish, German, the French, they all play just a little bit differently. There's little subtle differences that you hear in their playing. Now, companies like France have always embraced Black American music. I mean, way back into the 40s with jazz and all that stuff. France has been always right there. There were a lot of Black musicians who were starving in America that made a wonderful living in France, And so their interpretation, France's interpretation of jazz in particular, is a lot closer to Black America than some of the other places.
Okay.
And the interpretations that happen along the way, they get refined and everything. I mean, I think it's getting better and better, but I kind of like those differences. I mean, I like to hear a French musician playing it slightly differently. That is amazing to me, and it brings a whole new side to guitar playing and interpretation that is freaking awesome. I don't want any ornamentation. I don't want anything else to try to pull me in.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like that with any kind of music. It's what pulls me in, what makes me emotional. It's not so much technique or how you can emulate somebody else. It's how can you make somebody feel something?
Like one of my favorite quotes is music is the sound your emotions make. And that's exactly what it is. I don't give a damn if you could play 1,000 notes per second. That is so fucking boring. You'll pardon my French. That is so fucking boring. I can't listen more than a couple of minutes. I don't give a shit. You can play as fast as you want to. That doesn't touch me. I'll listen to Jeff Beck and I'll be touched. I'll be emotionally moved. And that's what I expect from music. I don't expect, prowess, technique. I don't give a damn about that. Not at all. Who cares about that? Plus, that's not music. That's gymnastics. It's like, it's the most wonderful thing for the soul, Wonderful thing about playing the guitar, you feel it on your body. And you feel it under your fingers. And it's an instrument that you interact with. I'm used to that. I love that. I don't want that to change, any of that stuff. It's just the most wonderful feeling as a musician when you grab a hold of the instrument that you love. It becomes part of you, and that's all there is to it. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. No matter what my failures and successes have been, that part's always been consistently beautiful. Always.
Hey, thanks for listening. Be sure to visit WUSFjazz.org to watch local jazz performances, find jazz events in Florida, listen to curated Spotify playlists, and a whole lot more. WUSFjazz.org. Today's audio was recorded over Zoom. Production assistance by Chandler Balcom. I'm Warren Buckholtz, host and editor. Studio Sessions Podcast is a product of WUSF and is sponsored by Community Foundation Tampa Bay, with support from the Palladium, the Gobia Foundation, and by you. Thank you for your support. Learn more about jazz and Arts Nexus Florida by visiting our website at WUSFjazz.org. Copyright 2025 WUSF.